All right. So I'm going to go through this lesson. This lesson specifically uses class-based components. I'm not going to use class-based components. You can look at here and just see kind of what that looks like. But when I push up the solution, I'll also have functional base as well as class-based components next to it, so you can kind of see. But what we're going to do today is work on this mute button challenge right here. It already gives us like some boilerplate, but I'm going to fork this over to my personal GitHub. I think I already forked. So if I just go to Tom Preet, mute button, so 1. Yep, there we go. So I'm going to clone this down to my personal machine. So I'm on GitHub or my Charlie challenges. I'm going to git clone like so. CD in the mute button 1. Clear everything out. List everything. So I've just got this README and these icons. Yep. And then inside of here, I'm going to go ahead and npx create React app mute button. So I'm just going to create a new React app called mute button. Again, this is going to take maybe 30, 45 seconds. But yeah. Does anybody have any questions? Just going to bring that over here. Nope, no questions. Cool, that was pretty quick. All right, so I'm just going to open this up into a new VS Code window. There we go. All right, so what I'm going to do.
Is there a way to make it not nested like that? Like put a dot kind of like you do for Django?
No, the reason why that happened is because I cloned it and then I made a React app. So what you would do is just directly inside of my Charlie challenges is npx create React app mute button. But I need these icons that are included in the project. So I cloned it first.
Okay.
Yep. So I'm going to need these icons. So if I look at these icons, I don't know if I have like an icon viewer for SVG. I'm just going to move these into my source directory because I'm going to need that at some point. All right, so let's go ahead and just run npm start just to get this up and running. Oh no. So list everything out. I'm not currently inside of my mute button React app, so I could cd into mute button and open this up, or not open it up. I could open it up, but I'm just going to npm start. Oh, there we go. Bring that over here. And there we go. All right. So I'm going to open up my app.js initially. And I'm just going to totally get rid of all this stuff because I don't need it. And what I want to do is essentially create a button that shows a mute icon or an unmuted icon. So like, I don't know if you can see, well, I guess you can't. When you like press the volume on your computer, you might see like that little volume going up and going down or muted. So that's kind of what I'm going to create, is create a button that has a mute and unmute part. So with that, I'm just going to create a button that just says test initially. And all right, so there we go. I'm going to add some margin to that. So if I just go to app CSS, margin top, say 50 or 20%. I don't know. Well, not 25. There we go. There we go. So I've got this test button like so. So my goal is when I click that, I want to be able to change something in state that tells me whether or not this button is muted. So I need to create a state variable. So this is a functional based component. So I'm going to do import. I'm going to import the use state hook from React. And inside of my function component, I'm going to create a is muted, which is going to be a Boolean value. So true or false, is it muted? Yes or no. So I can create a set is muted equals use state, and is muted, I'll initially say it's false. So in a console log is muted initially. So if I come over here and see here, look in the console, is muted app.js line 8 is false. App.js line 8 is false. All right, questions so far about this? All right. So now I'm going to want to create a on click event listener. So when I click this, I want is muted to toggle to true or false. So on, off, true or false. So I'm going to create a toggle mute function that just set is muted. What should this value be? Anybody?
This dot state dot is muted, something like that.
This dot state is muted. So this dot state is only when we're using class-based components. So if we're using functional based components, we don't even need the this keyword because this is similar to self and OOP in Python. So since we're using functions instead of classes, we don't need to use the this keyword. We can just say is muted, whatever the opposite of the current value of is muted is. So if is muted is false, we're going to use the opposite of false, which is true. And then if it's true, then we're going to use the opposite of true, which is false. So we're going to toggle it between true and false. All right. Questions on that logic? So we're going to add an on click. And we're going to, so when I click that button, it's going to execute this toggle mute. It's going to invoke this toggle mute. It's going to set the toggle mute is muted state variable to bang is muted. So whatever the opposite of it is. So if I come over here and run test, now it's true, false, true, false. Right. And I'm going to get rid of that strict mode for the time being. All right. Questions on that? Is that pretty straightforward?
How does is muted get changed?
So is muted is changed because when I click that button, I have an on click event listener that executes or invokes this toggle mute function this toggle mute function executes or invokes the set is muted function that changes the is muted value. And what we're passing in to that new value is whatever the opposite of the current is muted value is. So if the current value is false, using the exclamation point, is muted does the opposite. So if it's true, then it turns false. So that's how. Does that make sense?
Sort of.
Oh, where are you struggling with? Is it the
I don't know.
all right. We'll get you
Just-
there.
Yeah. I'll just pay attention.
All right. So just remember this button has an on click. When I click that button, it executes this toggle mute function, and this toggle mute function executes the set is muted function. And this function is specifically used to set the is muted variable or to change it. And we're changing it to whatever the opposite of the current value
Got it.
is muted.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
This is probably a really stupid question, but how does the is muted variable in the beginning, how do we know that's a Boolean to start off? Because when we do other things, it could be any kind of value.
It's the parameter you pass use state.
Yep. So inside of use state, the initial value we pass in is a Boolean value.
Okay, so that lets it know that it's going to be a Boolean always.
And we
Okay.
can, yeah. So if I were to do like a string, like nope or muted, when I do bang is muted, it might throw an error because it might not even know what that is. Ah, I guess it does. So I guess muted is a default truthy value. But yeah, that's interesting. But yeah, so we're just having it as a Boolean value.
Yeah, it was a true value because a string is true unless it's an empty string, right? Would that be correct?
Yeah, should be. All right, so now let's actually go ahead and create a separate component called like a mute. Should it be a mute button? Yeah, let's actually go ahead and create the mute button component. So we're going to kind of pass all this down. So I'm going to create components directory. I'm going to create another directory called buttons. And then I'll create a mute button.js. All right. So there we go. So now in here, I'm going to create a function-based component called mute button. And in here, what I want to do is essentially pass this button similar to this. I'm going to say, let's see. Yeah, I'm going to create a button. Let's get rid of that initially. It says muted. So I'm going to say like, if is muted, that's true. I want this to be muted, or else I want it to be so I'm going to say like, hey, if is muted or props dot is muted, return this div. Is muted. So else return not muted. Just something like that. So again, this function-based component, it's literally just a function. I can do a bunch of different logic. I can be like, hey, if props is muted, return something else, return something else. So what I'm going to do here in the app.js, I'm going to import the mute button. And I'm just going to import it in here, and it should automatically import it directly on line 3. So import mute button from components, buttons, mute button. Like so. And I'm going to pass in props is muted to the mute button. So now we can say props, or let's console log props, console log props. So is muted right there. So an app.js line 13, you can see app.js line 13 is muted, is initial value is false. I'm passing is muted down as a property to the mute button component, and I'm calling that prop is muted, just calling it the same thing as the state variable. You don't have to, you can call it something different, but it's generally best practice to call the variables the same thing so you don't get confused as it's the data is being passed down. So is muted to is muted, it's being passed in as a prop in the is mute button component. And I'm console logging props right there. So you can see is muted is false on line mute on the mute button component line 4. And then right here we have got logic. If props is muted is true, it's going to return is muted with a button on it. Else it's going to return a div with a button that says not muted. And currently it is not muted. Questions on how that logic is working?
When you set props, like you set props there with mute button, you could theoretically set an infinite number of properties, right? You could just list as many as you want, and then they would all be accessible.
Correct. Yep. What other questions do I have? All right. So now what I want to do is pass this toggle mute function that sets the state in our app component down to our child component. So I'm going to say toggle mute equals toggle mute. So now if I look over here, I can see is muted is false, and then toggle mute is a function. So toggle mute is a function that set is muted to the opposite of the current value of is muted. So now I can add an on click event handler to both of these buttons. So I can say props is or toggle mute to that one. And then also to the button down here, I can add the on click props toggle mute. All right. So now when I click this not muted button, it's right here, the not muted button. If I click it, it's going to run props toggle mute, which if you come over here, it's going to execute this function toggle mute, which sets is muted of the parent state to the opposite of the current value of is muted. And then that's going to change. And then that's going to trigger a re-render of the mute button component, which the new value of is muted is going to be passed down into the mute button. And then it's gonna, the new value of is muted is going to be passed down as a prop. So if I refresh that, I say not muted and I click it, is muted is true. False, false. There we go. So every time you change state, it triggers a re-render of the component. So when I change state, it re-renders this part of the component. Or re-renders the component with all the new data. So there we go. So if I refresh, click that is muted. So now is muted is being displayed. So, but we've got the toggle mute attached to that button. When I click that, runs the toggle mute function to the opposite, sets the new is muted value, and then passes that new value down to the mute button component. Questions on how that works?
What's the extension you have that does the import for you?
I am not sure off the top of my head. It might just be IntelliSense.
Yes.
Is it ES what?
1 second.
ES lint?
No, I have it.
Is it IntelliSense? No. I'm not quite sure off the top of my head. We'll get it to you though.
ES7 plus.
ES7 plus.
Yes.
All right, I'll check it out. Thank you.
Yeah. IntelliSense. I got too much stuff imported. All right. So I'm doing this if else statement. But I don't really need this else here at the bottom. I can just return something like that. Because when it comes in here, if this is true, it's just going to execute this. If it's not true, it just jumps down here. So I don't really need that if else statement. All right, let's make use of these icons. So if I have this button, let's go ahead and add an icon. So I think it's what image. I don't remember SRC, something like that. I can do image tag React using the image tag in React. All right. So yeah, there it is. Something like that. Just going to look at an example. Here we go. Perfect. So inside of this source, I want to use these icons. So I have an on icon and an off icon. So I can import on from, I got to go up a level, up 2 levels, icons, on SVG, off SVG. All right. So I'm going to use is muted. I don't know. Let's see. On was it alt tag on, and then whoa, I'll use this off tag right here. All right. Like so. All right, I got a couple errors. What is going on? source icons off. See if this works. Nope. Source namespace tags. What? That's weird. Hmm. That's a new error I haven't seen before. Let's see what that means. Stack Overflow, 2 years. So where I'm importing it from, let's see.
Did you move up too many folder paths?
No, because I had to move up 2 folders, 1, 2, and then I'm in the icons.
Do you not need the curly braces around your import names?
Let's see. No, because it's JavaScript. What's going on? And set the throw if namespace false to bypass this warning. Oh. As SVG. Wonder if this is a new React. Should. Let's look at. Let's try that. As logo. Huh. That's interesting. That shouldn't matter though. Nope. WTF. Hmm. That's stupid. I'm not doing that. Let's see, adding images to source tag React. Let's just see if we can bypass something. So we've got that.
Can you just put the SVG tag as a JSX? Just bring the whole thing over. Just use it as a JSX element instead of importing the file.
Like import.
Everything from SVG to SVG, cut and paste that over.
Wait, say that again?
Yeah, just like cut and paste the whole SVG down inside of your div.
I don't think I want to do that, but let's see if that works.
I don't think I would do that, the XML part, but I would start at SVG.
There we go. Wonder why it's not working. Let's see. if
Instead of
we got-
using it as a source, just use it as a JSX element.
Oh, I hear what you're saying. Yeah, I'm just not gonna do. Yeah, I don't want to do that because it's not that super important. So let's see. React, no, on audio on image. See if we can find. See if copy an address. I just want to see if this works. That might work. Muted audio. Good. What do we got? Here we go. Let's just do this one. Maybe this will work. What in the hell? Yeah, never mind.
It seems to be a pretty common occurrence with SVG files, and there are actually websites that allow you to rework the import.
There we go. There we go. Yeah, it's weird. That must be a new error with React 18. All right. So I've got these two images. Thanks for staying with me. So now what I'm going to want to do is instead of having a button, I want to be able to click on these images to change it. So I'm going to add, instead of having this button here, I'm going to just move this on click to up here on this div. So again, just moving this on click to this div. So I can get rid of those buttons like so. So now if I click on that, it's starting to work. But we should be able to simplify this component even more. So what can we do? So looks like we're repeating code here on this toggle mute. So what can we do? Can we add like a ternary operator? So instead of is muted, return this, we can add some logic inside in between here, such as like props.is muted, render this image tag, else render this image tag. And now we can get rid of this part, and we can get rid of that. Looks like I am missing. There we go. And I can indent this a little bit more. There we go. So now it's saying we're just adding a single toggle mute. We're saying, hey, if props is muted is true, render this, else render that. So now, there we go. It's still working. We can simplify it more because we have two image tags. So now we can get rid of, if we had, obviously, we don't want necessarily this little big thing. This is just a workaround for that error we had. We can add that logic, this is muted, inside of this source. So we can get rid of that. We can get rid of this part. And then instead of two image tags, we can just have one. And we can run some logic inside of this source tag. We can say props.is muted, display this tag or this image, else we can display this image. And we can simplify that just by putting things on different lines to make it a little more readable. Else. So we've got an image with a source. We're saying is muted, render this, else render that. And we can also do the alt tag like props.is muted, else off. Everything's still good. Now everything is still working. So we simplified that component where we still just have one div and one image and just the logic, some ternary operators inside of here. All right. Any questions on that? What questions do you have about me simplifying? All right. Let's keep talking about destructuring. So inside of this is muted or this mute button component, we're passing in two props, is muted and toggle mute. And we're calling props toggle mute, props is muted, props is muted. So I don't want to keep having to prepend props on all my functions or all my props values. So I can destructure by calling is muted, toggle mute. So I'm destructuring both of those from props. And now I can get rid of the props and just run is muted. And now, there we go. Everything is still working. You can take this a step further, which you don't have to, but you can just destructure directly in here the props. So I can move that directly into there and get rid of that. So I'm literally destructuring directly inside of the parameters, and everything should still work. But I'm just going to keep it as like so. What questions do you have about passing data and passing functions down to its children, to child components that update parent components values? None. All right.